Welcome everyone, welcome to Red Light District Sunday. Where is this Red Light District, you may ask? Well, it's here. So, what we have to go over today, after going past the raid, of course, it's time for Mythic Plus. It's also been a couple of weeks since we have gone through Mythic Plus the last time. In these past couple of weeks, we have gotten, at the very least, I hope, at the very least, two crafts of tier set for players. So now, I would say that the majority of the player base should be, at the very least the ones that go into Mythic Plus, they should be at 4 pieces of their tier set. Worst case scenario, you are still at 2 from the Creation Catalyst crafting. That being said, we have gotten a lot of changes in these last 2 weeks on how things have been going in Mythic Plus, from the popularity as well as the performance. Obviously, generally speaking, if something gets more popular, very often it's because it is doing much better, right? So the first thing to go over when it comes to Mythic Plus, of course, is the popularity, and we are starting with tanks first. We have been going over the popularity of tanks for quite a while, and we have seen that Protection Paladin remains the overall most popular of tanks, and then you had Guardian Druid, which was the second. Okay, it was the second on the podium, and then below the Guardian Druid you had 3 specs very close to each other: Blood Decay, Brewmaster and Vengeance. The only one off, as usual, the only one off was Protection Warrior. Now, what we can see for today, after a couple of weeks of Mythic Plus, we can see that Blood Death Knight is the tank that has been gaining more popularity. The loss is primarily to Guardian Druid. It's Blood that is getting more represented. I'm sure you might have seen more Blood Death Knights in Mythic Plus keys. You might have realized the damage they can do. We went over why and how they can do so much damage thanks to their tier set and also the help of their Covenant ability, Shackle the Unworthy with the Covenant Legendary. So that has been a steady growth for Blood Death Knights in Mythic Plus. And this is for plus 20 keys, which is what we looked at last week. But after a couple of weeks that have gone by, we can also start looking at the highest of keys, the keys higher than 25, where compositions start mattering more and more, and we do see that it's actually Blood Death Knight and Brewmaster Monk that are the most represented, and we also see, surprisingly, that Guardian Druid is the tank that has the most difference from plus 20 to plus 25 keys compared to the others. Prot Paladin is still quite popular, but definitely the highlight of tanks is how much more both Brewmaster and Blood Death Knight are being represented. When we move over to healers, healer is another spot that we have looked over the past few weeks for the growth, the continuous growth of Holy Priest. We had been pointing out that Holy Priest passed Holy Paladin, and at that point Holy Paladin was also passed by Restoration Druid. What happened now, after a couple of weeks, is that Holy Priest is still quite popular, but it does seem to have stopped. You know, Priest was in the 8% range, and then went up to 13, to 17, to 20, to 24, but now, even after a couple of weeks, they only went up by 0.9%, as opposed to Resto Druid, which has continued to grow. And there is also yet another small loss for Resto Shaman, which is still, despite the small loss, quite clearly the most used of healers in high keys, but the highest of keys, the keys even higher than plus 20 keys, we do see still that Resto Shaman has a lot of representation, and that when you go higher in keys, Resto Druid is played less compared to Holy Paladin. Holy Priest, on the other hand, is still quite represented as well. No real hope, I would say, at the moment for both Mistweaver and Discipline Priest, which remain very, very underplayed when it comes to healing. Then we move over to the Melee DPS and the changes in the popularity. The standout main change for Melee is Survival. Even though Survival has gotten hotfix nerfed on Wednesday on this reset, they have kept growing. They went from 11% to 16%, so they gained almost 50% more representation compared to a couple of weeks ago. Many other specs have remained more or less within 1 or 2% from where they were before. The only main serious change has been the continued growth of Survival. When you look at the highest of keys, you can see that Survival, once again, continues to grow even more. Because at the highest of keys, the spots taken by melees are basically generally Survival and Subtlety, with the, off chance of Fury, a little bit less, and then Windwalker and Havoc. these seem to be the most represented of Melee. We have seen that enhancement was growing quite a bit in popularity in line together with survival, mostly because they were also popular in the raid. But eventually this popularity sort of fizzled out in Mythic Plus. Now Enhancement Shaman is back to definitely not as unpopular as before, but definitely not a flavor of the month special pick for Mythic Plus. That role they still have for the raid, but not for Mythic Plus. Meanwhile, when we look at Ranged DPS, there is another major change in this past couple of weeks, which is Destruction. Last week we looked at how Demonology, while still being the better performing spec in the raid, they were also popular in Mythic Plus. Meanwhile, now, Demonology is getting almost passed by Destruction, which has gained significantly in a couple of weeks compared to what was expected of them. Other specs have not changed as much. Beast Mastery is still underplayed compared to Marksmanship, Shadow Priest and Elemental Shaman are still not as played, and Frost Mage is still the standout pick for mages. In the highest of keys, we have a similar type of concentration of picks towards the better specs. You can see that it's Frost Mage and a bit of Fire Mage, a bit of Marksmanship Hunter, and then the rest is in Warlock. Both Demonology and Destruction, but this time around it's Destruction that is being played more in the highest of keys. So we do see that despite the round of nerfs to both Destro and Survival, they have kept growing just fine in Mythic Plus popularity so far. Another thing we can look at as far as Mythic Plus is concerned is the success chance of these week's specs, how likely you are, if you have any of these specs in your key, to be successful, to time the key, to not deplete it. A couple more weeks, more item level, more players with tier sets, the chances are gonna go up. Compared to a couple of weeks ago, the percentages were spanning from 58 to 70% for the DPS, so there was a 12% gap. This time, however, the top performer is at 81% and the bottom performer is at 66%. So the gap has gotten wider. From 12% it went up to 15%, but the average chance of timing a key has increased. Worth pointing out that Subtlety is still the highest, the most likely chance you have in your group to time a key. That was the main repeating spec that we see 2 weeks later. Another one being Survival, which went from 68.7 to 83% and is now the third most likely to time a key. As you can see from this, pretty much the biggest and largest gap between two resets has been Destruction. Obviously, Destruction was middle of the pack more or less, now it's second. Other changes are not too drastic but still relevant, like Arcane Mage. We were surprised a couple of weeks ago when Arcane Mage was third in success chance. Now they are back to where they should be, I guess, middle of the pack, and it's now Fire and Frost Mage being much higher up in the chances you have to complete a key successfully. We can also go back and laugh at the bottom. At the bottom we do have still some quite well-known specs to be there, because Arms is there, Affliction, Retribution Paladin, Feral Druid, Assassination Rogue have remained down there still. There has been no particular improvement for these specs. Now looking at tanks as far as success chance is concerned, they too went up by 13% in average. However, the gap has gotten wider, because before the gap was just 4% chance to complete the key between the tanks, now the gap is 10%. The likelihood has also changed significantly. As to what we pointed out in the growth of Blood, Blood was last 2 weeks ago. Now Blood is second to third, tied with Vengeance. So there has been also a significant growth for Blood Death Knight. However, much like the DPS, we do have one spec that remained the same from last video to this one, which is Brewmaster. Brewmaster still seems to be the most safe of tanks as far as key completion is concerned. Lastly, we have the healers. So when we look at the healers the last time, there was again a 5-ish% difference, and this time around there is almost a 12% difference. So it's now gotten more wide and far apart, the chances of healers to complete a key. Funnily enough, the main change of the week was Discipline. A couple of resets ago, for some reason, Discipline was the second most likely to complete your key, but now it's at the bottom, similar to where Mistweaver is. Again, much like the DPS had Subtlety staying in the top, and then Brewmaster for tanks staying in the top, for healers we have Resto Shaman staying in the top. Also, what about the difficulty of the keys themselves? Not just the chance that the specs have to complete the key, because From last time to now, we've also gotten some severe round of nerfs to both of the Tazavesh dungeons, for example. You know, last time, right before this nerf came through, we left like this. Tazavesh, both dungeons were very low in completion chance. Now, 2 weeks later, how are things? We still have some good old faithfuls in the easiest category like Necrotic Wake. Necrotic Wake went from 81 to 95%, basically. It's even easier. It has a gigantic timer, very lenient. Other runs being towards the top are Plaguefall and Halls of Atonement, also quite simple. The change, of course, is both of the Tazavesh dungeons, because now Streets of Wonder went from being the hardest key with a 39% completion to being a good key with a 70% completion. However, not as big of an increase for Solia's Gambit, which went from 52% to 63%, so it's gotten better, but not as much. This week, however, being a fortified week with raging, certain dungeons have gotten worse, obviously. Fortified dungeons like the other side, like Spires of Ascension and Theater of Pain, this week have been quite a pain, no pun intended. They are all orbiting towards the below 60% chance to completion, and the worst one of all, Theater of Pain, being at 48.5%. What I want to finish the video with is the popularity of the comps. This is essentially going to be how likely are you going to be to see these comps in a group, because these are the top 5 combination of runs that you will see. So let's just touch on the DPS for a second. As you can see, Frost, Subtlety and Windwalker is the overall across most used of compositions for high keys. After that, you have a little bit more variety for both tanks and healers. Guardian, Protection and Blood Decay are sharing a good amount of time amongst themselves, and healers, again, it's mostly Restoration and Holy. And then, interestingly enough, I'm not sure what to make of this, it's Holy Paladin that gets popular together with Resto Shaman. Despite Holy Priest supposedly having much more runs than Holy Paladin, somehow Holy Paladin gets much more played in these 2 particular compositions. So with this being said, this is a pretty decent week for pushing. As you can see here, this is the Fortified, Raging, Explosive, Encrypted week in yellow. It is the better of the weeks we have gotten in the past 3 weeks at the very least. So if you're thinking about increasing your rating in a few of those dungeons, this should be the week to do it, unless it's one of those nasty ones, unless it's one of those nasty fortified dungeons. With this being said, we can stop our review of Mythic Plus for today. We have seen a few interesting changes, particularly the continued growth of the 2 nerfed specs, Destro and Survival. We will see if this is still not going to affect them in the following weeks, or if we will start seeing some sort of a decline. Same goes for the rise of Blood Death Knight, now that they have very competitive DPS as opposed to what they were used to before. Those are the main things I would be interested in looking and checking in the next few resets of Mythic Plus. But for today, this was all. So I'm going to leave you back to the last day of your weekend. Thank you guys, of course, for watching the video and for helping to support the channel. You can continue to do so, obviously, by liking on the video, as well as commenting with whatever you want down below. As usual, the offer to roll your face on the keyboard and type whatever you entered is still valid. You can also find me on Twitter as well. And also, I take all simp applications, because I am available on Patreon as well. Thank you guys again. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, fuck. See, this is the problem. It's just I'm not used to the light. I'm just not.